The navigation panel flashed red 3 seconds before everything went to hell. Darius barely had time to register the warning before the merchant vessel Wandering Star lurched sideways, throwing him against his restraints, hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. Emergency klaxons screamed through the small cockpit, competing with the horrible shriek of metal being torn apart somewhere in the engine compartment. No, Darius muttered, his hands flying across the controls, trying to compensate for the sudden loss of thrust from the port engine. The view screen showed nothing but swirling white. He dropped into the atmosphere of something. Though he couldn't remember any planets on his route that looked like this, the ship bucked again, and this time he heard the sickening crunch of the starboard stabilizer giving way. His stomach dropped as the vessel began to spin, the white outside the view screen becoming a dizzying blur. Years of piloting experience screamed at him to do something, anything, but the controls were barely responding, and the altitude indicator was dropping fast. He was going to crash. The realization settled over him with an odd sort of calm. After 5 years of running cargo between the outer colonies, searching every backwater moon and forgotten station for any trace of his sister Tessa, this was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory, not even in a firefight with pirates, but in a stupid mechanical failure over a planet he didn't even recognize. The impact came like the fist of an angry god. Darius' world compressed into a single moment of incredible violence, the screech of tortured metal, the snap of breaking restraints, the taste of copper as he bit his tongue. Then darkness swallowed him whole. When consciousness returned, it came with cold. Not the mild chill of a malfunctioning environmental system, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep through the hull itself and wrap icy fingers around his bones. Darius groaned, trying to move, and immediately regretted it. Pain flared across his ribs and down his left arm. "Come on," he wheezed, fumbling with the release on his restraints. His fingers were already numb, clumsy. It took 3 tries to get the clasp open. When he finally stood, the cockpit tilted at an unnatural angle, and he had to grab the pilot's seat to keep from falling. The view screen was shattered, and through the broken crystal, he could see endless white. Snow. He was on some kind of ice world. And from the way the temperature was dropping, the environmental systems were failing fast. The emergency kit was stored in the back compartment, if it hadn't been crushed in the crash. Moving through the ship felt like wading through a nightmare. Every surface was coated in frost, and his breath came out in great white clouds. The emergency kit was intact, thank God, and Darius pulled on the thermal suit with shaking hands. It was rated for extreme cold, but looking at the temperature gauge on his wrist display, he wasn't sure it would be enough. -70 and dropping dot. He had maybe an hour before hypothermia set in. Maybe less if he couldn't find shelter. The exterior hatch was jammed, frozen shut or warped from the impact. Darius threw his shoulder against it once, twice, and on the 3rd try, it burst open with a shriek of protesting metal. The wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and bringing tears to his eyes that froze instantly on his cheeks. The world outside was a howling white void, snow and ice stretching in every direction as far as he could see. He was going to die out here. The thought was surprisingly matter of fact. Nobody knew where he was. He deviated from his flight plan to check out an old distress beacon that turned out to be nothing. And now he was paying for that curiosity. The cold was already working its way through the thermal suit, and each step through the knee-deep snow felt like walking through concrete. That's when he saw it. A faint orange glow in the distance, barely visible through the storm. At first, he thought it was a hallucination, the cold playing tricks on his oxygen-starved brain. But as he staggered toward it, the light grew stronger, and he could make out the shape of a structure half buried in the snow. Metal walls, reinforced with what looked like ice bricks, and a ventilation pipe releasing thin wisps of smoke that were immediately torn away by the wind. Shelter. Someone had built shelter on this frozen hell. Darius' legs gave out when he reached the door, and he collapsed against it, pounding with numb fists. "Hello." His voice was torn away by the wind. "Please, I need help." Nothing. The howling wind was his only answer. He tried again, hammering harder, desperation lending strength to his frozen limbs. "My ship crashed. Please, if anyone's there." The door opened so suddenly that Darius nearly fell inside. Heat rushed out to meet him, so intense after the brutal cold that it felt like pain. He stumbled across the threshold and collapsed to his knees on the metal floor, gasping, his entire body shaking uncontrollably. What in the frozen depths? The voice made him look up. A woman stood across the shelter, silhouetted against the glow of a fire pit carved into the center of the room. For a moment, all Darius could process was warmth, and the fact that he wasn't going to die in the next few minutes. Then his vision focused, and his breath caught. She was tall, easily 6 feet, with skin the color of deep amethyst that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Her eyes were silver, huge and luminous, currently wide with what looked like shock. 2 elegant horns curved back from her temples, and her hair fell in midnight waves past her shoulders. She wore dark, insulated clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And she was staring at him, like he'd just materialized from thin air. "You," she said, and her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, melodic but sharp. "You're human." "Guilty," Darius managed, trying to stand and failing. His legs wouldn't support him anymore. "I'm sorry to intrude. My ship crashed about 5 miles from here. Engine failure. I just need—" He broke off, another violent shiver racking his body. "I just need to get warm." The woman alien, clearly alien, though beautiful in a way that made his chest tight, stared at him for a long moment. Her expression shifted through several emotions he couldn't quite read before settling on something that looked like resigned frustration. "Of course," she muttered, more to herself than to him. 3 years of peace, and the universe sends me a human." She moved closer, and Darius could see the details of her face, now angular features. A generous mouth currently pressed into a thin line, and those extraordinary silver eyes. "Can you stand?" "I'm trying," Darius said through chattering teeth. She reached down and pulled him to his feet with surprising strength, steadying him when he swayed. Her hands were warm, no hot, almost burning through his thermal suit. "Get out of that wet suit," she ordered. "You'll die of hypothermia if you stay in it." Darius nodded, his fingers fumbling with the clasps. She turned away, giving him privacy, and busied herself at the fire, adding more fuel from a stack of what looked like compressed biomass. The shelter was small, maybe 15 feet across, with supplies stacked neatly against the walls and a sleeping area in one corner covered in thick furs, when he'd stripped down to his underlayer damp, with sweat and condensation, but at least dry. She handed him a container of something hot. "Drink," she said. "It'll help." The liquid was bitter but warming, and Darius drank it gratefully. "Thank you," he said. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did." She sat across the fire from him, her silver eyes never leaving his face. "What were you doing in this system?" "This moon is abandoned. Has been for 20 years. Checking a distress beacon," Darius said. "It was old, probably a false alarm, but I had to look. In case—" He broke off, the old grief rising up. "In case it was someone I knew." Her expression softened slightly. "You're searching for someone." "My sister. She disappeared 3 years ago on a research expedition. No one ever found her or her crew." He stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I've been checking every lead, every abandoned station and forgotten moon. This was just another dead end." "I'm sorry." she said, and she sounded like she meant it. My name is Seraphine. Not that it matters much out here, Darius. He looked up at her, really looked at her, and saw the loneliness in those silver eyes. How long have you been here? 3 years, Seraphine said quietly. I was exiled. For what? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. For falling in love with the wrong person. Someone my people deemed unacceptable. They gave me a choice to renounce him or leave forever. I chose exile. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Darius could hear the pain underneath. He was supposed to follow me. He promised he would. But he never came. I'm sorry, Darius said, and meant it. Seraphine shrugged, but the gesture was stiff. It's in the past. I've made my peace with it. She stood abruptly. You can sleep over there. She pointed to a corner away from her sleeping area. The storm will last for days at least. Maybe longer. When it passes, you can try to signal for rescue, though I wouldn't get your hopes up. The atmospheric interference makes communication nearly impossible. Darius nodded, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him. He moved to the corner she'd indicated and curled up on the cold floor, wrapping his arms around himself. Even with the fire, the temperature was dropping as night fell, and within minutes he was shivering again. Violent tremors that he couldn't control. Across the shelter, Seraphine watched him with an unreadable expression. Finally, with what sounded like an irritated sigh, she stood. This is ridiculous, she announced. You're going to freeze to death, and I refuse to have a corpse in my shelter for the next month. Before Darius could respond, she crossed the small space and pulled him to his feet. What? Be quiet, she said sharply. She dragged him toward the sleeping area, the furs piled thick and inviting. Your human body can't regulate heat properly in these conditions. Mine can. This is purely practical. She stripped off her outer layers down to a thin underlayer, then climbed into the furs and held them open. Get in? No. Darius hesitated for only a moment before complying. He was too cold to argue, too exhausted to care about propriety. The furs were impossibly soft, and when Seraphine pressed against his back, her body was like a furnace. Heat radiated from her in waves, seeping into his frozen muscles, and within moments, the violent shivering began to ease. This is just survival, Seraphine said into the darkness, her breath warm against the back of his neck. Nothing more. Right, Darius agreed, but he could feel her heart racing against his back, could hear the slight tremor in her breathing. Just survival. They lay in silence as the storm howled outside, two lost souls clinging to warmth, and life in the frozen darkness that morning came without sunlight. Darius woke to the same gray dimness that had filled the shelter the night before, the only illumination coming from the dying embers of the fire pit. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was, or why his body felt like it had been trampled by cargo haulers. Then awareness returned, the crash, the frozen wasteland outside, and the warm body pressed against his back. Seraphine was still asleep, her breathing deep and even. One arm draped over his waist in a way that felt far too intimate for two strangers sharing body heat. Darius carefully extracted himself from the furs, trying not to wake her. The temperature in the shelter had dropped significantly overnight, and his breath misted in the air as he moved toward the fire pit. Adding fuel was intuitive enough compressed blocks that looked like dried vegetation, mixed with some kind of binding agent. The flames caught quickly, spreading warmth through the small space. Darius flexed his fingers, grateful that all his extremities still worked, and that the numbness from yesterday had faded. You're up early. He turned to find Seraphine watching him from the furs, her silver eyes luminous in the growing firelight. Her midnight hair was tousled from sleep, and there was something vulnerable about her expression that hadn't been there the night before. "Didn't want to disturb you," Darius said. "Thank you for last night. I would have frozen without you." Seraphine sat up, pulling the furs around her shoulders. It was practical, nothing more, but her gaze lingered on him a moment too long before she looked away. "There's water in the containers by the wall. We'll need to ration it carefully. The storm could last another week." "A week?" Darius' heart sank. "I have to get a message out. My cargo route people will worry." "They'll assume you're dead," Seraphine said bluntly, standing and beginning her morning routine. "This moon has claimed more ships than I can count. The atmospheric interference is complete during these storms. No signals get through." She paused, then added more gently, "I'm sorry, but you need to accept that you're trapped here for now." The days that followed settled into an uneasy routine. Mornings began with tending the fire and checking the storm. Shutters' thick metal panels that Seraphine had reinforced with layers of ice to keep out the worst of the cold. Darius discovered she'd been living here far longer than 3 years. The shelter itself had been built by a research team decades ago, abandoned when Nivara was deemed too hostile for permanent habitation. "I found it in the database before I came," Seraphine explained on the third day as they organized supplies. "I knew I needed somewhere remote, somewhere my people wouldn't follow. This moon was perfect abandoned, forgotten, and far enough from the trade routes that no one would stumble across me. Except me," Darius said with a weak smile. "Except you." She handed him a container to stack, though that wasn't exactly stumbling, more like catastrophically crashing. He laughed despite himself. Fair point. The work was mindless but necessary, and in the quiet moments they began to talk. Small things at first: Seraphine's preference for organizing supplies by function rather than alphabetically. Darius' admission that he'd never been good at keeping things tidy on his ship. But gradually, the conversations deepened. What was she like? Seraphine asked on the 4th evening as they ate a simple meal of rehydrated vegetables and protein paste. "Your sister." Darius stared into his bowl, memories flooding back. Brilliant, reckless. She was always the smart one in the family. Got accepted to the Colonial Research Institute when she was only 19. Everyone knew she'd do something important. He swallowed hard. She was studying extremophile bacteria on the outer moons when her team disappeared. No distress call, no debris field. They just vanished. And you've been searching for her ever since. Someone has to. He met Seraphine's eyes across the fire. "My parents gave up after the first year. Said it was time to move on, to accept she was gone. But I couldn't. I keep thinking that maybe, somewhere out there, she's waiting for someone to find her." Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. "That's why you checked the distress beacon, even though it was probably nothing. Every beacon could be her." Darius set down his bowl, his appetite gone. "I know the odds. I know I'm probably chasing ghosts. But what else can I do? Just forget she existed?" "No," Seraphine said softly. "You keep searching, because love doesn't have a statute of limitations, and hope doesn't expire just because time passes." She stood and moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I understand that better than you know." "Tell me about him," Darius said. "The one you were exiled for." Seraphine's expression shuddered, but after a moment she began to speak. "His name was Corin. He was from a client species. Our people had opened trade relations with his world about 5 years before I met him. I was working as a cultural liaison, helping negotiate contracts and smooth over misunderstandings." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "He was charming. Funny. He saw me as more than just my position or my family name. You loved him." "I did." She stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in her silver eyes. And when my family found out, they were horrified. In our culture, relationships with client species are forbidden. They see it as a betrayal, a degradation of our bloodlines. They gave me an ultimatum: end it or face exile. But you chose him. I chose the possibility of him, Seraphine corrected bitterly. He promised he'd follow me, that we'd build a life together away from both our worlds. I came here to wait for him, sent him the coordinates, everything he'd need to find me. Her voice cracked slightly. That was 3 years ago. I'm still waiting. Darius reached out and took her hand. Her skin was hot against his, almost feverish, but he didn't pull away. Then he's a fool. Seraphine looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted between them. The air in the shelter suddenly felt charged, heavy with unspoken words. Darius, a loud crack from outside made them both jump. Seraphine was on her feet instantly, moving toward the storm shutters. That didn't sound like wind. What was it? I don't know. She pressed her ear against the metal. But something just... Another crack, louder this time, followed by a grinding shriek that made Darius' teeth ache. Seraphine's face went pale. The secondary vent. Something's blocking it. What does that mean? It means we have about an hour before carbon monoxide from the fire starts building up in here. She was already moving, pulling on her heavy outer layers. I have to clear it. You can't go out there. The storm will kill us slower than suffocating, Seraphine snapped. She grabbed a heavy tool from the wall, something that looked like a combination of a pry bar and a hammer. Stay inside. Keep the fire low. I'll be back in 20 minutes. I'm coming with you. No, you're not. Your thermal suit is damaged, and you're not acclimated to this cold. You'd be dead in 5 minutes. Then you'll be dead in 10, Darius shot back. You need someone to watch your back out there. What if you get disoriented? What if you fall? Seraphine's jaw clenched. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse, drag him back to the sleeping area, and bar the door from outside. But then she grabbed a spare thermal suit from the supplies and threw it at him. Put this on, and if you die out there, I'm never forgiving you. The cold hit them like a physical assault the moment they stepped outside. Even through the borrowed thermal suit, Darius could feel the temperature trying to steal the warmth from his body. The wind was a living thing, howling and clawing at them. And the snow fell so thick he could barely see Seraphine, even though she was right beside him. They made their way around the shelter, Seraphine leading with one hand on the wall to keep her bearings. The vent pipe rose about 10 feet above the structure, and halfway up, Darius could see the problem. A massive chunk of ice had broken off from somewhere and lodged itself against the opening, completely blocking the airflow. I need to climb up and break it free, Seraphine shouted over the wind. That ice could fall on you. Do you have a better idea? She didn't wait for an answer, just started climbing the maintenance ladder welded to the side of the vent. Darius positioned himself below, ready to catch her as she fell, though he knew that at this height and in these conditions, a fall would likely kill them both. Seraphine reached the blockage and began hammering at it with her tool. Chunks of ice rained down, and Darius had to dodge several pieces that were large enough to crack his skull. The wind was getting worse, and he could see Seraphine struggling to maintain her grip on the ladder. It's not breaking, she called down. Try the other side. She shifted her position, and that's when disaster struck. A gust of wind hit her broadside, strong enough to tear her grip free. Darius watched in horror as she fell. Tumbling backward off the ladder dot, he moved without thinking, positioning himself underneath her. They hit the snow together in a tangle of limbs, Darius cushioning her fall, but taking the brunt of the impact himself. Pain exploded through his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and held on to her. "Are you insane?" Seraphine gasped, her face inches from his. "Probably," Darius managed. "Are you hurt?" "My pride, mostly." She pulled herself up, then helped him to his feet. "Your shoulder is fine. We need to finish this." They returned to the vent together this time, Darius steadying the ladder while Seraphine climbed. It took another 10 minutes of brutal hammering before the ice finally broke free with a sharp crack, falling away and clearing the blockage. They stumbled back to the shelter entrance, both shaking from cold and exertion. Inside, Seraphine stripped off her outer layers with trembling hands. That was reckless. You could have been killed. So could you. Darius winced as he tried to remove his suit. His shoulder was definitely injured, a deep ache that suggested something was pulled or bruised. Seraphine saw him struggling and moved to help. Her hands were gentle as she eased the suit off, and when she saw the bruising already forming on his shoulder, her expression softened. "You broke my fall." Seemed like the right thing to do at the time. She retrieved a medical kit from the supplies and began applying a cold compress-ironic given their surroundings. Her touch was careful, almost tender, and Darius found himself studying her face in the firelight. The elegant curve of her horns, the delicate structure of her features, the way her hair fell forward to hide her expression. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly, not meeting his eyes. "You barely know me." "Because you matter," Darius said simply. "Because in the last few days, you've shown me more kindness than I've experienced in 3 years of searching. Because ... He trailed off, realizing he was about to say something he couldn't take back. Seraphine's hands stilled on his shoulder. Slowly, she looked up at him, her silver eyes searching his face. "Because what?" "Because I'm starting to care about you," Darius admitted. "More than I should. More than is smart given that we're trapped here, and I don't even know if we'll survive long enough for rescue." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Seraphine leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture that felt ancient and intimate. "I'm starting to care about you too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because the last time I let myself care about someone, he abandoned me. Because trusting again feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. Because..." Darius silenced her with a kiss. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing this new territory. But then Seraphine made a soft sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. Her lips were hot against his, her body radiating that incredible heat that had kept him alive. And Darius felt something in his chest crack open. A door he'd kept locked since Tessa disappeared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Seraphine's eyes were wide and her cheeks flushed a deeper purple. "That was, yeah," Darius agreed. She laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the dim shelter. "We're idiots. Both of us. Falling for each other when we're trapped on a frozen moon with no way out." "Probably," Darius said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I've been alone for so long, Seraphine. Searching for someone who's probably dead, trying to fill the hole she left behind. And then I crashed here, and I found you, and for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I can breathe again." Seraphine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've been alone too, waiting for someone who was never coming, telling myself it was better this way. But you fell out of the sky, literally fell out of the sky. And now, I don't want to be alone anymore." They held each other as the storm continued to rage outside, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in each other's arms. And when they finally returned to the sleeping firs that night, it wasn't just for warmth anymore. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find on this frozen world. Hope.